Hello to everyone that's joining. We're going to be kicking off in a couple minutes, so just sit back, grab some coffee, relax, maybe grab your lunch because I know it's around about lunchtime in Australia. So won't be too long. We'll kick it off at 1 p.m. on the dot. So about 1 more minute left. All right, well, it is 1 o'clock. Let's kick it off. We've got a lot to talk about. This is web accessibility for beginners. And just know that this whole webinar will be recorded. So first and foremost, welcome everybody to Web Accessibility for Beginners. I personally am very, very excited to present this because I often get asked from our customers, how do we approach this? How does our organization start with accessibility? And honestly, it doesn't have to be that difficult. I know that websites are inherently a little bit technical because at the end of the day, you are dealing with and you're working with something called HTML. And often when you are editing HTML, if your CMS does not allow for it, it can be quite tricky. So people get stuck, people get turned off, and they don't look at accessibility or addressing the accessibility issues on their website. So the aim of today is to really demystify this, to understand how you can really start with web accessibility, how to approach it, how to strategize it with your organization, and actually start looking at some checkpoints. So as usual, some quick housekeeping, pretty standard stuff for anyone who's joined our webinar before. Please feel free to use a live transcription from Zoom. This recording will indeed have closed captioning. We'll also send the recording and slides after the session. We do encourage questions of all kinds, but if you do have those questions, please pop them in the questions panel and we will answer them at the very end of the session. And of course, if we don't get to all of these questions, we'll follow up afterwards via email. And now, a round of introduction. So, hello, my name is Clarence. I'm one of the customer success managers here at Monsido. In my day-to-day, I wrangle in the team to ensure that our customers at Monsido see the most out of the platform. Outside of this, I have a background and keen interest in front-end web development and love watching my personal projects come to life, as well as sharing my own knowledge with others and also our customers. If you are a customer with us at Monsido, you may have heard of someone by the name of Ozair, and now I'll pass it over to him.
Hi, everybody. Thank you all for joining us today. Yes, my name is Ozair Zaman, and I am also a customer success manager here at Monsido. My day-to-day is very similar. Look after the customers, making sure all their needs are met, helping them with any queries, and really, working with them to really get them through the process of doing all their checks, right? Outside my day-to-day as Clarence, and we have worked together. I'm also in coding. We've actually done a few projects together and it's been a lot of fun. Outside of coding, I also love teaching. So combine coding and teaching. This role was just like a dream role for me. I love to help people, teach them more technical side and making it really easy for them. Yeah, now back to you, Clarence.
Cool. And just a quick run through of today's agenda. We'll be looking at the basics of web accessibility, what it entails. We'll also be looking at a bit of a quick introduction into Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG, or you may hear me say WCAG or WCAG. but WCAG. We'll also be looking at some commonly failed WCAG checkpoints and how to actually fix them, as well as how to set up a strong workflow to tackle accessibility. And I'm sure we've got time at the very end, but we have a Q&A session right at the end for you. But before we get into today's main content, I'm just going to run a very quick pulse check, and I'll launch that right now. Ooh. So today's pulse check is really just to get you thinking about where you are with web accessibility. Are your web content editors familiar with accessibility? Are they not familiar at all? Have they heard about it, but no experience? I've done some internal training, which is amazing, or even some external training too. So we'll give it about a minute just for the poll to kind of go through. There's a lot of entries coming in, which is good to see. A lot of activity. Oh, it's a pretty even split. Looks like we've heard about it, but have had no experience. We've also done some internal and external training, which is great too. Great to hear. But while we wait, I will throw a question to you, Oz.
Right.
Out of all the checkpoints in WCAG, which ones do you often tell customers to start with?
Clarence, thanks for the question. Now, I always go back to the basics, the backbone of the internet, the humble link. I think that's a really easy one to start with. It's very clear, and it really covers many of the ideas that we're talking about when talking about accessibility, as Clarence and I will cover later on. But yeah, that's one of my favorite things to talk about is the link. It's everywhere on the website. It's crucial to everyone who wants to get information and go somewhere else. So yeah, it's my favorite. What about you, Clarence?
Okay. Yeah, I was going to say the link. You stole mine. I would probably say, because you are right, it is really the backbone of how you navigate on the web, right? So if
Absolutely.
those aren't accessible, then unfortunately, users cannot access or navigate different pages. So I will say link, but I will also say a skip to content link as well. But we'll cover that in more detail in a moment's time. I will end the poll for now, and you should all be able to see a bit of the results there. But yes, it looks like it's a fairly even split between have heard about it, but no experience, as well as done some internal training. So it's good to see that people are actually, invested and looking at digital accessibility and web accessibility, because it is very, very important, which Ozair will cover in the basics of web accessibility. So let's kick off the main content. I'll pass it over to Ozair.
Thanks, Clarence, and welcome again, everyone. I'd like to start this session by demystifying what's involved in making your website accessible, right? I'll delve a little into what is web accessibility. I'll touch on some of the numbers out there, like how many of us are disabled, or considered disabled, some of the consequences of not making a website accessible. So that's going to be an interesting one. And a little game. I'm going to introduce a bit of a thought experiment for you. So next, please, Clarence. So let's talk about web accessibility, right? According to the World Wide Web Consortium, web accessibility means that website tools and technologies are designed and developed so that people with disabilities can use them, right? So from a user's perspective, this really means users need to be able to perceive, navigate, and interact with the web, and be able to contribute to the web as well. Now let's pause here for a minute. Think about your own website, right? Think about who is visiting there and what are they there to do, right? So from that perspective, think about the parts of the website that they'll need to interact with to get the job done that they're there to do. And are those items perceivable? Are they navigable? Are they able to interact with them in an accessible way? And are they able to contribute? And this is a great starting point for starting the journey into making your website accessible. Now, web accessibility encompasses ensuring accessibility for all disabilities. However, good accessibility can also benefit user experience of all users, right? And website SEOs also benefits from this as well. Next, please, Clarence. So now that we've talked about some of the reasons for doing accessibility, let's talk about the numbers. Now, internationally, the World Health Organization estimates 15% of the world's population to have some form of disability, right? That's 1 billion people. And here in our own backyard, Asia Pacific, that's 650 million people. So that's 1 in 6, right? Now, these numbers are diagnosed cases, right? We often overlook accessibility that is not diagnosed, right? And one of the groups there is the aging population, right? So by 2050, 1 in 4 people in Asia and the Pacific will be over 60 years old. And here in Australia, the population of, aged 85 is to double in the next 25 years. So that is a lot of users who may be missing out if your website is not accessible, right? So I think this is a really good point, in terms of giving you a good idea of why website accessibility is really accessible, right? So next, please, parents. Right. This brings up to the consequences of, not being accessible, right? Now, we've talked about the numbers. There's a lot of us out there, right? First of all, first and foremost, you're potentially creating a frustrating user experience for those that are, reliant on assistive technology. But however, in addition to those, right? Say if you are a commercial business, you're most likely losing out on revenue. If you're a non-profit organization, you're losing out on donations in your fundraising, right? And if you rely on admissions and membership, you're most likely losing out on application, right? Now, just touching the non-profit organization for a second there, it's a really interesting number there. In 2021, it was discovered that 66% of the revenue for non-profit organization came from donations, right? So and a lot of the disabilities who are visiting your website, they're actually advocates, so there are probably some strong users who would really like to donate to the cause as well. So, you're missing out some really strong users who will be able to, make good contributions. But yeah, let's go to the next one, Clarence. Right. This is the thought experiments that I was talking about. So we talked about some disabilities and, and thinking about your website. And what I want to do for this one is put your mind in the seat of someone with, varying types of disabilities. So I want to introduce 2 users to your website, right? We have Jimmy and Jane. Meet Jimmy. He is the user of your website who is blind. So that's a permanent disability, right? Jimmy is going to be using a screen reader to access your website, right? And I think a great thought experiment here is to download a screen reader, close your eyes or cover it with a blindfold or something, and use that screen reader to navigate your own page. Honestly, I'm ironically going to say it's an eye opener, right? It is going to really show you, where some of the challenges Jimmy might be facing in using such technology and having such challenge, right? Let's go over to Jane. Now, Jane doesn't have a permanent disability. She has a broken arm because she's an avid snowboarder, right? And she tried to do a jump from a cliff and that didn't go too well, right? But now she's on your website. Now she's on your website and, she's relying on keyboard navigation and voice assisted technology to navigate your website. This is a good exercise into seeing how navigable and how interactable your website is for someone with a disability, someone who's not using a mouse, right? So again, same thing, unplug your mouse, get on your keyboard and try to navigate your website just by tabbing and seeing how you can access all your link, if you can access all your link as well. And like I said, if a journey involves in any other interactive items, are they able to access that as well? So it's a really good look into where you are in terms of your pages and its challenges it's trying to face. But yeah, so that's a bit of an introduction into what the journey of accessibility is about. When you start getting your mind into the mode of the users and thinking about that. So on that note, we're going to talk about some guidelines. We're going to talk about some checks, and Clarence here is going to elaborate more on that. After you, Clarence.
For sure. Thank you, Oz. I personally have just tried to use websites just to test out this kind of thought experiment. I did this a long time ago, and it is very difficult, honestly, if you cover your eyes or if you close your eyes and try to navigate just your old, general websites, whatever that may be, it is very difficult. So really try to put yourselves in their shoes. And try to shift the dial with your own website and within your organization and change and shift the culture as well. So yes, introduction into WCAG. So the WCAG is a set of guidelines developed by W3C. So W3C is a massive organization who creates a lot of the standards and technologies that we use on the internet today. They're not just involved in accessibility, but these guidelines help to ensure that the web content is accessible to everyone, including, as Ozan mentioned, permanent and temporary disabilities. So here's a bit of a history into how far we've come, the WCAG standards, and these are internationally recognized. So let's just say, for example, you are responsible for a website with content for different markets or regions. The same guidelines apply. So going back in time, back to 1999, we've come a long way, of course. There were 17 original checks and success criteria. Fast forward a little bit to 2008, the W3C introduced the POUR principles, P-O-U-R principles, and that is perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust, as well as the 3 conformance levels, which I will go into detail in a moment's time. But these POUR principles and conformance levels really form the basis of determining accessibility checks today. We've got 2.1, which is the current benchmark, the current standard, and this is really just due to the advent of mobile and tablets. We saw the need, or they saw the need, to introduce 17 more checkpoints, and it is, as I mentioned, they're currently the standard today. And of course, we've got 2.2. They've introduced 9 new success criteria. And this, of course, has not yet been fully released. The proposed recommendation was to be released in July. It keeps getting pushed back and back and back, but I strongly believe this time around it is going to be released in late August. So it is in final draft. Any moment now, it is imminent. And yes, 3.0. So there's no official release on this, of course. It is still being developed. We can expect to see more complex and complicated checkpoints to address disabilities and things like dexterity, speech, low vision, temporary disabilities, and of course, catering for web content for mobile devices, laptops, and even perhaps wearable devices. I'd be interested to see how that looks like, maybe fast forward in, I don't know, maybe 5 to 10 years time. So I want to break down WCAG because I think it is a little bit confusing for a lot of people, especially if this is your first foray and first time looking at the guidelines and all the 2.1 checkpoints. So I mentioned before how each of these checks are based upon the POUR principles, so the P-O-U-R principles, and of course the 3 conformance levels, A, AA, and AAA. I like to think of it as a hierarchy. So at the very bottom, you've got the checkpoints and the success criteria. Above that, you've got the conformance level. So does it conform to level A? Does it conform to AA or AAA? And then above that, you've got the principles that it falls under that guide these checkpoints. And of course, above that, you've got the version as well. So all of those would be confined and contained within the 2.1 WCAG version. So as an example, if we take a look at success criteria 1.2.1, that states that for all pre-recorded audio and video, it is required to have a text transcript or at least a link leading to a page that contains that transcript. And so this is level A conformance. And the reason why it's a level A conformance is because it will be very difficult to basically consume that data if you are, say, for example, visually impaired, or if you are deaf, you cannot actually consume or read, or you can't even, there's so many barriers for you or for the visitor to actually consume that information. And so, I also just kind of want to cover what those conformance levels are. And we've got level A, AA, and AAA. So level A is indeed that minimum conformance level. It does encompass the largest range of disabilities, but also without first addressing these minimum items, massive, massive barriers exist and cannot be overcome by assistive technologies. This is why it's called a minimum conformance level. So a good example of this is, of course, that text transcript example that I've shared with you before. But also another great example of this is having a skip to content link. So it's basically, as soon as you press tab on your keyboard, it will direct the user or visitor straight to the content, bypassing the navigation bar or sidebar. Because imagine having to go to a particular page in the body. So you're trying to click on, or you're trying to navigate to a different page in the body, and you go to that page, but you have to tab through every single navigation item 50 times just to get to that content. It is a terrible user experience. You've got level AA as well, and this basically just means more accessible. And there may still be some barriers that exist here, but it should work with most assistive technologies. But this will also impact the look and feel and even some of the functionality of your website. So it's important to talk amongst yourselves, share ideas, check if it is worth it or not. And as well as level AAA, this is more accessible, generally not required. This will certainly impact the look and feel and the functionality of your website. It will basically make your website look like something from w3c.org or from Wikipedia. Cool. So I want to talk about WCAG versus the legislation. So typically, at least here in Australia and New Zealand and Singapore, legislation does not offer its own guidelines, but it does reference WCAG. So here in Australia and New Zealand, it is a requirement for your services to be inclusive and accessible. I know for a fact that Australian government agencies are indeed required to meet WCAG 2.1 level A. And I always often say to my customers that digital accessibility is a marathon. It's a journey. We know that websites are super dynamic, right? Things change all the time. The content changes, the layout changes. Maybe you are up for a website redesign. If you are making strides to become compliant, having an accessibility statement on your website will help keep your organization accountable. And your visitors will also know that you are working towards a higher level of compliance too. And also deep diving into WCAG. So of course, you don't need to read every single one of WCAG and all its checkpoints. It is indeed very technical and dry unless you love that. I know a lot of developers love reading documentation. If that's for them, great. If that's not for you, that's also fine too. I'd recommend for you to find an online course, find more of these webinars, break down some of these easier or high impact checkpoints like the skip to content example that I was sharing before. And if you ever get stuck, you can always reference the documentation or the checkpoint itself. Google it if you don't have a tool like Monsido. But I am biased. Using Monsido will indeed help you out a lot because we show you all of the failing checkpoints against all of your failing HTML snippets. And if you don't know what one means, you can consult our help center that basically corresponds to each checkpoint. It's just a button right next to the checkpoint. And when you click on that button, it outlines the problem. It shows you why it's important to fix it. It shows you the element requiring change, as well as how to actually resolve it with pass and fail examples. And I'm going to pass this one back to you, Ozer.
Thanks, Clarence. So yeah, Clarence really just, gave you a bit of a look at some of the guidelines, some of the principles that you'll be working with to help you with your checks on your website, right? So what I would like to do is talk about more on these checks, right? This is where we are going to tie your website to the guidelines of WCAG. So, and the guidelines are those checks, right? You'll be looking at those checks and then testing them against what you have on your website, right? First and foremost, you're going to see there's a lot of checks. On that note, Clarence, next screen, you'll probably have a lot of failing checks, right? So that is, you're going to see massive numbers 11 million, right? That's like mind blowing. You think, oh my God, that's too much. I don't want to do this. That's all. You get disheartened, but don't be. Honestly, it's actually not that bad. And with a little bit of a thought process and a little bit of planning, honestly, it's not difficult at all. And that's what we want to show you here. It's not difficult to start on accessibility, right? And as Clarence mentioned, it is a journey. You're not getting to the end right away. It's a journey, right? So planning is crucial here, right? So what's a good way to start your planning is to prioritize, right? Prioritization is key. And, whether you're using an auditing tool like Monsido or manually doing accessibility audits, it's easy to be overwhelmed with all these checks, right? Really easy, right? So a good way to prioritize your website is to maybe just start with your 10 most popular pages, right? Look at the issues on those 10 pages and work from there. This is good for all teams, right? But if you happen to be lucky enough to be using a tool like Monsido, you can also go by checks as well. We have a really good sort of categorization process where you can categorize a lot of those checks depending on users, depending on the roles of the people involved in your organization. It's a really nice way to break down, divide and conquer those checks. And that way you're not looking at 11,994,720 checks in one go, right? So remember, accessibility is a journey, not a destination. That's the key thing to remember, right? You'll need to manage it ongoing, and Clarence will talk about workflows in later on, right? Now let's dig deeper into these WCAG checks. So now, please, when I say easy, medium, and when I'm saying those two words, please don't think of difficulty in understanding. I'll show you what I mean. Easy, I'm really referring to how easily you can do it, the resources you would need to do it, and the time involved, right? Let's look at some easy checks. I think a really good one, again, back to the basics that I always talk about, is the link, right? So a good check is verifying that the descriptive link of the text is accurate, right? So does the link text provide enough context to the user that's going to go to the next wherever page or download a document, right? So that's really easy to do. You can access this via your content management system, just a quick text change and you're done, right? It just requires a quick human, decision from your end, done. And similarly, verifying alternative text for an image is accurate. Same thing, right? Just a quick check. Does it match what the image is about? If so, you're happy. If not, easy to change as well. Medium is when you start to be more collaborative, a bit more time involved, a bit more resources involved, right? So some of the medium level checks that we consider medium, again, please take this with a grain of salt. They're not, it's not indicating any difficulty. One of them is ensuring captions are added to a video, right? So very easy to do, but it's just time consuming, right? And you might need to get involved your video editors, not just yourself, right? And then once you do that, you might need to get some developer action as well, like maybe add some, text to the website as well. So it becomes starting to get more collaborative, starting to be a bit more time consuming, but again, it's not complicated. We're just talking about, processes and resources involved as a medium level. So let's look at some more difficult ones. Skip to navigation, simple to understand, right? But now you're adding it to every page, right? You're going to need a developer involvement here. Make sure it's going to the right section of your web page. So you might have, your UX team involved here. So where do they want, the user to click and end up in? So there's a lot more involvement here from a lot of different team members. So it's more collaborative. Same thing with missing Aria labels on forms, right? Easy to understand. Once again, we're looking at a bit more team involvement and whatnot. So again, navigating modal pops up is the same thing. So quick summary, the different levels of check, really think about it in terms of time involved and the resources involved in doing them, right? So you might start on the easy checks. That's why we recommend doing the easy checks. They're quick, easy, and just require a quick decision from you. Next, please, Clarence. Now, I want to go over a few examples of easy. I'll go over an example of a medium and an example of a difficult one. Again, my favorite one, link text, right? This one here is an A-level check. And I'll also touch on A versus AA, right? So here, again, we have a bit of an item on your website. It says web accessibility, and there's a learn more button, right? The text link here is learn more. if someone is using assistive technology, they're hearing learn more. They may not be able to see or have vision, and so they can't see that it's about web accessibility, right? So that doesn't provide enough context to the user. Just learn more means nothing, right? To that particular user who is blind. So you might want to change to learn more about web accessibility module. Now that is a better contextual text link, right? But you're thinking, wait a minute, what if I don't want to change the design, right? That's going to be too long. It's going to, make the UX designers super angry. They're not going to be happy about it. We do have other options here. Aria labels, again, really easy to add, but now you're going from easy to a medium level check, because now you're adding Aria labels. It takes a little bit more involvement from your team, but so there's a transition there, right? But yes, that's a really example of a good, easy one to do. Let's look at a medium one next. Next, please, Franz. So this one here, again, it's a really simple check. All we're checking here is making sure your headings are dividing your pages into their section. Now, in an ideal world, all headings are dividing your pages into neat and orderly fashion, right? But we know we don't live in an ideal world. And sometimes you have web pages where we're actually using these heading and subheadings to actually indicate like a bold writing or emphasis on a particular text, right? So what we want to do is make sure you're using headings just for headings. This is great for assistive technology. It helps with navigation and it helps with clarity of your page, right? So now to change this, you need to make some decisions, whether it requires a bit more decision involved, because you're thinking, is it just emphasis being done, or is it actually a heading? So, and then when you do change it, you may need some developer involvement as well. Again, you're starting to increase the time involved and the resources involved, but still a really simple process. So just consider that as well. Let's go to some difficult ones now. So these are where you're really, doing some edits on your page, involving multiple team members, and a lot of decisions to be made here, right? A good one is the contrast ratio on, this is going to maybe most likely affect your CSS. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with CSS, it's just style commands for your website, right? This is usually set by your team. They've got a style plan, look and feel for your website. And if you change this, it may throw off their whole style set, right? So it might involve not just changing the contrast, it'll change, colors of other unintended elements of your website as well. So this way you start to really impact your website change, and it may involve multiple decisions and multiple team members, right? So similarly to, is when you have form elements on your web page, you want to make sure it has an Aria label for assistive technology, so it can be read out what the form field is about. Again, you're getting your developers involved here. You're thinking about your UX designers and what the form is about. So multiple team members, again, involving multiple levels of edits as well. So again, it's not the complexity of the issue, it's more about resources and time. So that's the main thing I want to express here. There's some checks will be really easy to do, some checks will be hard to do in terms of resources and time. But yeah, on that note, let's go to the next slide here.
Before I do jump into the next slide, I actually just want to talk a little bit more about the Aria labels.
Oh, yes.
I like
Great
to think of Aria labels as kind of like an alt text for an image. You can add an Aria label to buttons, links, and when a screen reader passes through all of that content and those HTML elements, it will in fact read out yes, what you've added to that Aria label. So if we have a look here in this example, you've got here close, but in the website itself, what's live and what's visible to all your able-bodied visitors is going to be this X button. And that way you don't impact the styling and the hard work of your web developers or anything like that, or your UX team,
UX
marketing team. Yeah. So that way, you've got this button as accessible, but for your able-bodied visitors, it will still be rendered as an X. So super handy to think about Aria labels as kind of like that alt text for your images or any HTML element. And yes, over to you, Oz. Sorry, I had to jump in there.
No, it's a great one. I really like that. Yeah, think of it as, your alt text for your all your little elements for your website. Really nice. But on that note, I think use it judiciously. Like, don't put ARIA labels on everything. Definitely, you know, think of the use case, think of whether this needs it. Yeah, you know, it's definitely a great tool, but use it sparingly and only when needed. Now, this leads to the next question. What do we see? Like, what are we looking at? Like, when we talk to our clients, when we talk to our customers, you know, what are they asking us? The first thing is, where do we start? That's always what we get. What checks do we start with? That's the most common one, right? So again, I'm going to give you two answers to this, right? If you're not using a tool like Monsido, again, I'm going to go back to, you know, choosing your 10 most popular pages or 5 most popular pages, right? And that's always a great start. And if you don't have a tool, a good perspective to look at this is user journey. Think about, on those 10 pages, what are your users doing, right? What parts of your website they're interacting with, and are all those parts interactable? You know, will it break their, you know, journey to their end goal if one of the parts are not interactable? So that's a good place to start if you don't have a tool like ours. If you do have our tool, again, we have some really good filters. So you have multiple team members with multiple responsibilities. Responsibility is one of the filters we provide. So if you're a content author, you can filter out checks by content author role, and it'll give you checks where you don't have to require, you know, collaboration with other team members. You can make a quick decision, you know, and get those checks done. And that's a great way to start your own workflow. You know, you got your list of checks that you can do. You can have a labeling system on our tool as well. You can label the ones that you really want to do first. So it really makes it easy. So again, yeah, applying filters and using labels, an amazing way to start your journey here. And we usually help our clients come up with a good set of nice quick wins there as well. So the next one, as we always get, is, oh my God, like, again, back to where I started, there's 1 million checks, 11 million checks, you know, and they're everywhere. What's going on? Like, you know, and I think that's a good one. How do we, you know, find the global checks? One that's everywhere, one that's, you know, increasing the numbers. Again, if you're a team that's not using Monsido or a tool like ours, you start off with your basic 10 pages or the most popular 10 pages, and think about all the global elements on those pages, right? So you got your heading, you maybe have a search button or a search field that's on every page, you have your footer. So look for components that are appearing across all your pages, and then look at those items in that. That's a good indicator of what are your global elements, right? On Monsido, however, we have this amazing tool called Fast Track. It's really good. So you look at what we promote in Monsido is you look at a particular page, you look at an issue, and then you can use Fast Track to find out where that issue is occurring everywhere across your page, right? And then you can indicate what you've done. Maybe you made a fix, maybe you've edited, or maybe you're good with a check, right? You indicate it using Fast Track, and that multiplies your action across all of your website. So it's a really good way to compound your work. You work locally, you're working at a single snippet level, makes it really easy for you when you're ready to make a decision. Fast Track, and you cover for across all the pages. That's a really good way to leverage your time with Monsido. So that's a bit of a summary into, you know, getting down to tying the guidelines that Clarence mentioned before into the checks that you're doing, how you're picking some of those checks, you know, and some of the ways Monsido makes it easier to pick those checks and work through your WCAG workflow. So with that, I'd like to put it back to Clarence.
Amazing. Thank you, Oz. I love the fast track feature in Monsido. I always say the same thing as well to our customers whenever you're trying to fix HTML snippets or just anything on your website. If it is potentially found elsewhere on your website, just use fast track, because then you've actioned it for all of your global elements or any other page that that particular element appears in. Very, very handy tool. So setting up a strong workflow. How can we streamline the path towards compliance? So there are about 177 2.1 WCAG checkpoints. And I say about because it really depends on the conformance level that you want to adhere to. So I want to say around 170 to 190 or 188, I believe. But the bottom line is that there are a lot. And I know it can be very overwhelming. It can be overwhelming to a lot of people. And that's why it's important to have a strategy behind this. because it will really help to streamline your path. So what can we do? Well, we can define our goals. So if you are, and I know Jose made kind of a call out to this before, but if you are, say, for example, in the not-for-profit space, and you want to ensure your content and pages are inclusive, yeah, you absolutely would need to make your website accessible. I actually met with a customer yesterday, and their main visitors are typically those who are impacted with temporary disabilities. And of course, they don't even need to create a business case. They just need to make their website compliant. Maybe you're a retailer or you're in the e-commerce space and you want to check if your website updates or your newly published content is accessible. I know that there was, and I'm sure you've all heard about this one, but there was a landmark case by Coles where a particular user was not able to select delivery times, navigate the forms, and even submit their online order. So they got sued. And that's why, again, it's super important to, yeah, define these goals, understand what you need to do, and actually work on them over time. And maybe potentially you are in finance. Perhaps you're in government where you simply just need to meet digital accessibility requirements because you have to hit that Digital Discrimination Act. So find out who is responsible. Ultimately, I always say that accessibility is an organizational effort. It really is. There is something for everyone. Using a tool like Monsido can really help to break down those responsibilities. You can find the checkpoints within your scope of responsibility, work on those first. And you can even break them down even further. Work on the easy ones first that Jose mentioned. And maybe even find the ones that you can actually easily understand and fix. So when it comes to picking a strategy for addressing accessibility, the very first step that I always try to tell customers is to nominate a champion, right? So find an accessibility champion to ensure accountability and help keep progress consistent, and even shift that culture to get everyone on board. Step two would be to go through that low hanging fruit, go through some of the checkpoints. Yes, understand and find the ones that you can fix. Here, people, admittedly tend to switch off because they see so many checkpoints. They see 177, they see all these failing checkpoints. There's a lot of technical jargon, I completely understand, but break it down, have a mental filter. Again, find the ones that you are responsible for within your role, break those down further, ask yourself, can you resolve these checkpoints? And from here, you might need to do a little bit of research or use a tool like Monsido. And again, it can show you how. But at the end of the day, if you can't review these checkpoints, maybe due to technical limitations, and an example of this is maybe your CMS just simply doesn't allow you to do it, move on to the next one. Don't get bogged down by one checkpoint and then never look at accessibility ever again. Also, you are not going to be able to address all these checkpoints yourself. You will need the help and advice of your wider team, your developers, your marketing team, your UX team. Talk and communicate with one another, share ideas. And maybe you are going through these low-hanging fruit. Maybe you want to have a skip to navigation or a skip to content link. That might require the help of your developers or your agency if you don't have an in-house development team. Maybe you want to have a look and review some of your alt text. You might not necessarily need to speak to your developers for this. You might have an asset library in your CMS where there's like a little input field that will allow you to add alt text to all of your images. And maybe as well, when you create a new document or page, there might be an input field to ensure that your title does indeed describe the document. And by the way, that is an accessibility checkpoint too. And the third step is test, 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 test. So every now and again, test it. Deploy, publish the page, check if your audits work as intended. And education, education, and a bit more education. So there are a couple points that stick out here. Just ensure that your web content editors are trained or at the very least mindful of accessibility. and are aware of the common pitfalls. That way, failed accessibility checkpoints are not repeated. You do not want to repeat these failing checkpoints. You're then going to have to double handle these checkpoints. And of course, share a frequent report with your organization on your progress. It helps to have an accessibility champion for this, but if you use a tool like Monsido, this whole process is easy. It's in fact even automated. You can just simply download that report. You can download your history and the progress of your audits and share them with your direct reports. So I actually want to talk about the ultimate workflow. So as we know, websites are dynamic. We've got a whole heap of existing web content that we want to make sure that is accessible. And we've also got newly authored content or future content that will be written. So if we were to just drill into the how to tackle web content or existing web content, a few of our customers, I was actually having a conversation with a customer just a couple of weeks ago. And yeah, a few of them actually adopt a Monsido Accessibility Power Hour. They butt their heads as a team, address checkpoints together. And if you're a developer, it's kind of like a pair programming thing. It's always better to share your ideas. It's always better to work together. It just speeds up the whole process too. If you're using a tool like Monsido, there are in fact what we call a review checkpoint. And some of these don't actually require fixes. It just needs you to verify your intention. So a good example of this is checking if your link text is meaningful when read out of context. Programs, softwares, Monsido, anything like that cannot determine this for you. It's up to a human to validate this. So oftentimes, your link text is indeed meaningful. And if so, mark it as reviewed, move on to the next link text, move on to the next check. And now drilling into how to tackle new web content. So this is actually just a very simple process. Just run a weekly scan report for that particular page or the whole domain, that's up to you, and check if those new pages contain any issues, and yeah, ask your content editor to go ahead and fix and test them. And now as we begin to wrap up, and hopefully we have some time for Q&A, which I believe we do, I'd love to share some helpful resources. So from us to you as a gift is our Monsido Accessibility Handbook. We've had a lot of people get this handbook and say it's been a great resource to take back to their teams and get started. Or even someone who is not even familiar with accessibility, it's just a great resource to dive into. We've got a business case template. Maybe you require a business case to, start getting ahead or start looking at web accessibility, and report this business case to your direct reports. We also have an accessibility statement generator. As I mentioned before, I strongly believe that all websites should have an accessibility statement, whether that's in your navigation bar as an item or in your footer. Accessibility is a journey. You're not going to complete all checkpoints in one fell swoop or within 1 year. It's a journey, it's a marathon. So have something to hold yourself accountable and have something to share with your visitors to let them know that you are indeed working on accessibility. We also have accessibility checklists. So it's really catered to your role. So if you are a content creator, manager, or designer or developer, doesn't matter. Based on your role, these checks may be more relevant to you versus someone else or another team. And also we do have a color contrast checker. So please feel free to play around with this. There are, I don't know if you've actually had a look at some of the WCAG checkpoints, but there are a few that require you to check the contrast between, let's just say, for example, your text or images against the background. You can use this checker to help with that, to check if that is a 5:1 contrast ratio. Or maybe you want to check your links, if they are the differences between your non-active, active, visited link colors. Very, very handy tool to use. And as I mentioned at the start of this webinar, all of these resources will be sent to you post follow-up. But if you are keen on getting your hands on these resources right now, you can find them on our website. So I just want to run one last poll, and I'll stop sharing the other one. Sorry, that's my bad. We would love to help. So I'll just launch this right now. So of course, we'd love to help get you started on your accessibility journey, or really wherever you're at. And you can get a free accessibility scan of your website. And we will show you some areas of your site where you could fix some accessibility errors, and also content errors and QA errors like broken links and misspellings. You could also just get a demonstration of the accessibility module. We'll show you the UI, we'll show you the summary, we'll break down some of the accessibility checkpoints and categories. You can also schedule an accessibility review if you are an existing Monsido customer. That will probably go to myself, Ozair, or Raf, if you've ever met any of us. And of course, maybe you're just dropping by because you're curious and want to learn more. That's also fine too. Cool. And now, hopefully we've got some time. I think we do. Yes, we do. We've got about 11 minutes left. I'd love to be able to answer any of your questions. I know we've had some questions come through and we were answering them in the chat, but yeah, if you've got any more questions, feel free to pop them into the Q&A panel. Love to be able to answer them right on the spot for you. But at the end of the day, if you also need to jump, perfectly fine. We can always get to your questions. If you pop them in and leave, we can always get to your questions via email. I'll give it a couple minutes here. All good. Thank you. I can see that a few people are jumping off right now. That's all good. All good. We've got a question from Emily. That's not really a question. Thanks for a great session. All good. Not a problem. Ashwini, how do I determine if my website is WCAG 2.1 AA compliant? I'll give that to you, Ozair. How do we do that?
I think the easiest answer if you're on Monsido is are you at a good level for A-level checks? That's always really important. I think that's really key here. And once you're happy with the A, as you work through our Monsido system, you'll be able to, review the checks, and as you review the checks, they disappear from the list. So it's a great way to track how you're doing. By looking at the list, you'll see the number of checks you have left, right? And also keep in mind, Ashwini, again, the user journey as well. So as you're doing work in Monsido, keep in mind, what are the use cases for users visiting your website, and combining those two, you can get a really sort of a good feel for where you are and whether you're AA compliant, right? So you'll start to see a lot of the issues disappear from the Monsido accessibility window for you. And, you'll start to have a lot more clearer idea of what you have left. So that's a good way to check if you're AA compliant. Hope that answers your question, Srini.
Amazing. So we've got a question from Philippa Hamilton. I'll take this one. So any tips for checking accessibility of Power BI dashboards? Any tools that you recommend? Yeah, use Monsido. We have our API, which you can connect to our accessibility checkpoints. You can plug them into your Power BI dashboard and generate some custom and bespoke reports that way. I know actually a couple of customers that are doing that right now. So if you need some support, if you are a customer, I don't recognize your name, unfortunately, Philip, I'm so sorry. But if you are a customer, we can assist you with that and send you some documentation. But again, this is APIs and endpoints, so you may need to speak with your developers to get that hooked in. Another question is from an anonymous. What is the most accessible way to link to another web page in text? For example, more information, click here. Oh, that's a great question. I might
Really
pass that one to you, Oz, because you love links.
I do. Actually, that's a really good question. So just looking at the section, you said for more information, click here, right? Now, really, if we have an able vision user, where you are, you can see the surrounding and what more information you're talking about, right? But if you really want to make it accessible, you would say for more information on topic X, click here. right? So you need to include what you're giving the information on in that link text, right? So that's the key thing. You have to think about an assistive technology. They're tabbing through your links. And so the assistive technology is going to read out, for more information, click here. And they might not know what the context of that more information is. To provide the context is the accessible thing, like the base accessible way to, make sure that link is accessible. On top of that, you have the AA compliance where you are making sure your link is visible, contrast is good, legible and clarity, but that comes after giving the proper context. So I hope that answers your question about how to make a link more accessible. And that's going to your page, any page, it doesn't matter. All links really require the same sort of work and thought process.
Cool. And Sam has pinged through with a couple of questions. I'll answer one of them. So once WCAG 2.2 comes out, how quickly will Monsido be updating these checks in the accessibility tab? Great question. In fact, we've got a draft version of WCAG 2.1 readily available inside Monsido. So if that's something that you want to scan for now, we can set up your account, we can change it, change the scan settings in the back end, and we can go from there. But of course, how quickly will Monsido be updating these checks in the accessibility tab? Almost, I guess, instantly once the scan is complete. We'll show you all those checkpoints, and yeah, you can go ahead and update them yourself in the website. Sam has another question, in your opinion, is there an ideal compliance percentage, meeting/beating the industry average, or is there a magic number? So again, I do sound like a broken record here. Monsido, or digital accessibility or web accessibility, is a journey. I don't personally believe that there is an ideal compliance percentage. I think, just on a high level, it might be recommended to beat the industry average. So whatever's displaying for you in Monsido. But I have a lot of conversations with customers, and again, it goes back to that point where websites always change. Dynamic content, new pages deleted. It's very difficult to kind of hit a specific number, but a good starting point is, yes, try to beat that industry average, and at the very least, address the level A checkpoints.
Definitely. And to add to that, for clients, I may, Sam, I'm going to give you a number. So again, but I'm going to give it with a caveat, okay? If you're hitting 90%, you can feel really good. You can feel really good. But again, as Clarence mentioned, make sure part of that 90% are all your A checks. So if you're reaching 90 and you have a couple of key level A checks that are not accessible, then that 90% is not, really. So there's a bit of caveat there. And also, focusing on number can falsely give you a sense of achievement. Like as Clarence mentioned, it's a journey. So you reach the number and you can be really happy, but continue to keep looking at your website, start looking at user journeys and see, making sure, everything that they want to do, they have a good experience on your website. So yeah.
Cool. And we've just got one last question, I believe, but we still have got some more time for some more, so feel free to pop them through. What are your thoughts, and this is from Linda, so what are your thoughts on duplicates of sites that are designed to address specific accessibility criteria, for example, dexterity issues, site, etc.? I've seen these linked to main sites via an accessibility button and seem like it's a great idea, allowing organizations to cater for conflicting brand guidelines. That is a very interesting question. I personally haven't run into those particular websites myself, but now that you've got my mind thinking about it, I'm a little bit biased. I personally believe that, all pages or, your main domain should be accessible. If you do have specific, maybe microsites or sub-sites that are there to address things like site or dexterity issues, that could be a good idea, but I don't know. I think you might need to speak to an accessibility consultant for that one. I think that's a little bit out of my scope. What do you think, Oz?
Yeah, I agree with Clarence here. Definitely, yeah. In these tough decision ones, definitely consult with accessibility. Just to make sure you in your contents. Yeah, definitely.
All right. And I think we've got a couple more in chat. So,
Yeah, we've got one from Kenneth that's really interesting.
okay.
So Kenneth, you're asking, for images that are decorative, you don't need to put an alt text. That's true. And now then you further on went on to clarify that you have a personal photos on your page, and clicking on them takes you to visitors that, takes you to that profile page right now. In this case, I would say the decision finally is yours. Do you consider it decorative? Now, from me, just as a user, I would say it's not decorative. It is, it's indicating the person you are, the person you're visiting the profile for. So I think having an alt text there would be very useful. You could argue that it is decorative, sure, and you can make a strong case for it. But I think it's safer on adding our alt text for that one because it's providing some information that the picture here refers to the user that you're going to visit. So I would say use alt text there for sure, as it does
All
relate to
right.
the content. Yeah.
And I believe we've got one more minute left. So I will leave this to the last question here from Georgia. I work in the education industry. Can you use Monsido on a school intranet or only on public facing websites? So it really depends, right? Like if Monsido, I mean, this is a little bit technical, but if there is a link to your intranet and your intranet pages are linked from one another. So what I mean by that is if I click on another link, can I be navigated to there? By the same token, can a crawler navigate to another page in your intranet? Then I want to say yes, that is 50% of the battle. The other 50% of the battle is allowing our crawler to access those potentially private pages. Would we just need to whitelist your crawler? Yeah, most likely. Yeah, most likely just whitelist our crawler IP address. We can send you those details outside of this call. But also I know that I've personally run into some instances where our crawler has been challenged by, login forms or terms and conditions. And if that's the case, we will, like myself and Ozair, will need to personally look at it ourselves. But if you provision our crawler with login credentials, it should be okay. And secondly, if there is like a terms and conditions page or anything that requires user interaction, it may not. So yeah, again, let us investigate and we can go from there. Cool. All right, so that's time. We've actually hit 2 o'clock. That went by really quickly. So I hope you all got a lot out of this this webinar, this accessibility for beginners, the checks that you need to know. We really, really, really appreciate your time to come learn more about web accessibility. I'm very, very passionate about talking about it. Ozair too. So feel free to reach us in our website. If you're a customer, feel free to ping through in our chat support or just schedule a training session with us and we can go in a little bit more detail. But you can also find us on LinkedIn. So add us away and yeah, we'll be more than happy to continue the conversation there. So thank you so much all for joining. And I hope you have a great rest of your day. Take care. Bye.
Thank you all. Have a great day. Bye.